The sun rose slowly over the red clay earth of southeastern Nigeria. The air was thick with the scent of palm oil and smoke from early morning fires. In the towns of Aba, Oloko, and Umuahia, life had its rhythm, set by the clatter of baskets in the market, the lull of folk songs, and the laughter of women gathering beneath the shade of old trees. These women were more than mothers and wives. They were leaders of trade, guardians of tradition, and keepers of community justice. They ran the local markets, they farmed their own lands, and when necessary, they summoned one another in solidarity. In their world, leadership was not the privilege of the few. It was a shared responsibility. Their councils and meetings, often held in secret or under the open skies, were not to be trifled with. But times were changing. When the British arrived with their uniforms, their scribbled documents, and their foreign laws, they brought more than flags. They brought disruption. The colonial system didn't recognize the balance of power in Igbo society. The British wanted structure they could control. So they appointed warrant chiefs, men given authority to rule over people they often didn't understand. Men who answered to colonial officers instead of their communities. To the women, these chiefs were not leaders. They were symbols of corruption, betrayal, and everything that had begun to go wrong. The markets, once places of freedom and profit, were now being strangled. Colonial agents meddled in trade, imposed levies, and created a tangled mess of rules that only made life harder. And then came the census. Or rather, something worse than a census, a shadow of taxation. A year earlier, the colonial government had introduced a head tax on all men. It had caused grumbling, resistance in hushed voices, and even some protest. But in 1929, a more terrifying rumor began to ripple through the villages like wind through dry leaves. The women would be taxed next. To the British, it was a logical step. But to the women, it was an unthinkable insult. They were already stretched thin. They paid their own way, supported their households, traded in hostile conditions, and still maintained the cultural fabric of their communities. To tax them was to say, you are no longer free, you are subjects, you are assets. The spark that lit the fire came from a village named Oloko. On a quiet morning, a tax enumerator approached a widow named Nwanyeruwa. She was no ordinary woman, wise, sharp-tongued, respected. The man, under orders from Warrant Chief Okugo, demanded to know how many people lived in her household, how much livestock she owned, how much she produced. She looked him in the eye, and with a voice that shook with both defiance and fury, she asked, "Are you counting me for taxation? Are you going to treat me like a cow or a goat?" The man shouted back. The two argued. The market women gathered, watching, their hands pausing mid-transaction. Then Nwanyeruwa did something extraordinary. She dropped her goods. She ran to the town square and began to beat the traditional ogene, the metal gong that summoned women. The message was simple: come, now. And the women came. From every direction, from nearby villages and distant towns. They came barefoot, they came with their babies tied to their backs, they came with palm fronds, baskets and songs. They came not with weapons, but with a united spirit and centuries of ancestral strength. What followed was not a riot, it was a revolution. Over the next several weeks, more than 25,000 women mobilized. They surrounded colonial offices, disrupted court proceedings, sang war songs and danced the songs of protest passed down from their foremothers. They performed what was known as sitting on a man, a traditional form of protest where women publicly shamed abusive leaders through singing, dancing and chanting until the man was either removed or forced to change. Warrant chiefs fled their homes in fear. Some resigned, others begged for forgiveness. The British administrators, stunned by the scale and coordination of the movement, sent in soldiers to break the protests. In some towns, the confrontation turned violent. In Opobo, Calabar, and other areas, colonial troops opened fire on unarmed women. 50 women were killed, dozens were injured, but their message could not be silenced. The women had risen, not as individuals, but as a force of history. In the aftermath of the protests, the British were forced to re-evaluate their administrative system. The warrant chief system was weakened. Women were consulted more frequently in local governance. The colonial government realized, perhaps for the first time, that power in Nigeria did not flow only through men. It flowed through markets, through songs, through gongs and gatherings, through the women. The Aba Women's War of 1929 was the first major anti-colonial uprising in Nigeria. It wasn't fought with guns. It was fought with unity, courage, and a refusal to be silenced. Today, it is more than just a chapter in a history book. It is a legacy, a reminder that sometimes, when justice is nowhere to be found, the most powerful sound in the land is the voice of women rising.